Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Freeology Friday. I am Aaron Tomlinson, and he is.
I am Derek Day, and it's good to see you, Aaron. Happy Friday to you, and happy Friday to everybody that's watching and listening.
Thank you very much. How you been?
I'm doing pretty good, man.
Good.
Doing pretty good.
So, you got something good in the glass tonight.
I do indeed, and I would like to share it with you. I'm starting off in the spirit of the ghost of Aaron past. I bought some 5-pepper Bloody Mary mix, which this stuff is fucking nuclear. And then I have my Lucasoa potato vodka,
Yeah.
like one of my favorites.
Yep, me too.
And some clam juice.
Mm.
So I can have the Clamato effect without all of the high fructose corn syrup of Clamato.
Yeah.
And it turned out pretty awesome, I have to say.
Cool. So I am drinking some kind of version of an old fashioned. It's kind of weird color there, but it's I took yeah, I did right. Good thing I don't work in a lab. I took a light beer and made the simple syrup with light beer, and then added some Irish whiskey and some cherry and orange bitters, and it's awful sweet. I don't know, man. I don't know if I like it. So to be determined. Kind of tastes like iced tea, to be honest with you, like a Long Island iced tea.
Yeah. So it's very, very cocktaily.
Yeah, and it's very sweet. Damn. I didn't think I put that much of the simple syrup in there, but
yeah.
Anyway, it is what it is. So I might finish that and get something in the middle. So I'll excuse myself.
Yeah, if you excuse yourself and go mix another drink, it's all good.
So you want to introduce the topic tonight, or you want me to, or what do you think?
I'll let you go ahead and introduce it. This is your topic, but this is very exciting stuff here.
Yeah, so I was thinking this week about crisis, and I had often heard that the Chinese word for crisis is made of two characters, one meaning danger and the other meaning opportunity. So, from that perspective, every crisis is a dangerous opportunity.
Yeah.
And so I decided to look that up. I'm like, where is that true? I mean, because, there's so much stuff that gets, so-and-so said this, or quotes that just become, or knowledge that becomes part of our everyday thinking in life that really, when you track it down, it's not what
it must be true, because Abraham Lincoln said it on the internet, right?
Yeah, yes, exactly that. And so I was tracking that down, and so I learned a few interesting things. It was actually John F. Kennedy, then Senator John F. Kennedy, that made it popular when he gave a speech at a college in 1959 in Indianapolis, and he's the one that said the Chinese word for crisis is made of two characters, one representing danger and the other one representing opportunity. And then I looked at the omniscient source, the divine omniscient internet source, Wikipedia.
Wiki.
And they corrected that and said, actually, in the Chinese, the first character is definitely danger. The second character is change, or specifically an inflection point. So for people that may or may not know what that means, when you're making a graph and you change direction suddenly, like if you're doing a curve and it suddenly changes direction, kind of like a bell curve.
Yeah.
It's an inflection point. So that doesn't negate the opportunity part of it, but it does give an interesting illustration of what a crisis actually is. And so I got thinking about I think one of the things that causes people disappointment, for sure, comfort, in some respects later on despair, is that we have a certain trajectory that we think our life is going. And we have forethought it. We have, this is where I want to go. This is where I want to be. Or if we haven't forethought it, we've at least thought, this is where I will be, in a year, 6 months, 5 years, 10 years, whatever the case may be.
Mhm.
And something happens in life that knocks you off that course. And in some cases, knocks you in the complete opposite direction. So, for example, in September, I had a health crisis. I landed myself, I thought I was going to go to the emergency room, get some steroids or something, and go home. And I ended up in the hospital for something like 4 days or something. And they're telling me I barely made it in time.
Yeah.
So my life's going one direction, and then all of a sudden something happens, in this case, my health, and it kind of spins me in a different direction, right? It's like, wow, this is serious. Like, if I don't make some changes, I'm not going to be around to see my kids grow up and, all these various different things. So I'm sitting there with this idea of what the future was going to be. And then all of a sudden I get in this inflection point with my health that says, boom, there you go. Yep. So for other people, it could be a loss of a job. It could be loss of a relationship. It could be loss of a person that's very close to you. You've been through that very personally. And so we have these inflection points that hit us in life, but they're these dangerous inflection points. Like winning the lottery would also be an inflection point, right?
Sure.
If I won the Powerball, it's going to radically change the trajectory of my life, but it's going to change it for the better. That's something I'm going to be excited about, something to embrace. So when we're talking about crisis, we also have to bring in the danger point. And when something's dangerous, we perceive it as we perceive something as a threat, then we either attack it or we avoid it. We'll attack it if we think we can defeat it, or we'll avoid it, most of us, if we think we can't. So typical fight or flight response, right? Something out in my environment is presenting itself in a way that I'm perceiving it as a threat. So I either want to get mad at it, I want to destroy it, I want to attack it, get rid of it, fight. Or if I think I can't do that, then I want to avoid it. I want to get away from it. And so I'll flight from it, right? So I could have had two different responses to my own health crisis. I could have come out of the hospital and said, I got to make some changes, and attacked it in the way that I did, changing diet, exercise, a bunch of different things.
Yep.
Or I could have denied it and said, well, that was a close call, but really didn't, there's not really anything I can do about this. It is what it is. I like my life the way it is. I'm just going to enjoy my life, whatever I have left, or go into denial is what I'm saying, or yield my power, right? And not attack that situation. But either way, it's an inflection point in life. It's a change.
Yep.
And so I got to thinking about how good of a change that has been for me in so many ways. And it really gave me an opportunity, because I was stuck in a pattern, doing the same thing every day, thinking the same thoughts, going through the same routines and rituals and habits, patterns. And most of us do that, right? So I don't know how familiar you are with the work of Joe Dispenza.
Yep.
But most of the Dispenza stuff is based on, if you want something different in life, you have to change yourself.
Yep.
And so that can be hard, because what's the inflection point where we change? We just wake up one morning and say, hey, I mean, you certainly have done that on your own health journey with your weight loss and stuff like that. But for most people, something has to precipitate that change. If for no other reason, we need a marker in our brain, a marker in our life to say, okay, there was before and after, right?
Yep.
So for me, there was before I went into the hospital, and then there was after I went into the hospital. For a lot of people, they'll talk about losses in their life, like before this person died, after this person died, before the divorce, after the divorce, that kind of thing. And so I started thinking about embracing these inflection points that appear dangerous in our lives, these crises, and trying to see, as JFK said, the opportunity in the crisis. Because now that I've been knocked off center, now that I'm not, my life's not going in the same trajectory that it once was, if nothing else, there is an opportunity to reinvent myself, to be a different version of myself, to be a new and improved version of myself. And for me, that's a much more resilient way and empowering way to think about how unpredictable life is.
Yeah.
I'm prone to anxiety both by nature and nurture. I come by it naturally in that it's a genetic thing in my family, undoubtedly. And because it was a genetic thing in my family, I also got nurtured into fear and anxiety, right?
Yeah.
I mean, my mom was like, whew, afraid of everything out there. And so as a person prone to anxiety, it's easy to think about the uncontrollable factors in life. And that in and of itself can be at times paralyzing or debilitating. And so changing this perspective, even though I'm not currently going through a crisis,
Mhm.
changing this perspective to say, yeah, there are uncontrollable things out there in life. There are inflection points. There are more inflection points in the graph of my life coming.
Mhm.
Going to change the course of my life or knock me off course. But I can choose to see those then as opportunities for change and transformation. Whether somebody wants to say, you know, I'm making the best of a situation, I'm taking the lemons and making lemonade,
Yeah.
or whether, however you choose to view that.
Yeah.
The reality is, all of us are going to have unpredictable events and crises that occur in our lives. And so that's settled my anxiety down, right? It's like, okay, if something happens, sort of bring it on. I'm ready for the next challenge. That kind of an attitude, I think can contribute to our resilience and our happiness. So that's how I'll set it up.
And I think about this like, what is a crisis?
Mhm.
First of all, and people think of a crisis as something negative. There's a negative connotation
Yeah.
that lies shotgun with the word crisis, but it's not necessarily negative. A crisis is well, so you said that the opportunity, or not opportunity, what was the word that you used the second,
Change.
instead of opportunity to change? Okay, so you're talking about an inflection point, and inflection points happen in different ways, right? Like if you're driving along the street and you come to an intersection, that's an inflection point, right? Or if you're changing jobs, that's an inflection point. Or if you're getting a promotion on your job, that's an inflection point. Yeah, a child is born, a child leaves the house. All of those are inflection points. But the crisis, right? Sometimes a crisis is not necessarily a bad thing. A crisis is simply, let me, because I actually pulled up the definition for this. So it says, one definition is a time of intense difficulty, trouble, or danger, i.e., the current economic crisis.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is a time when a difficult or important decision must be made, and this is where you could decouple it or divorce it from negativity, because an important decision doesn't necessarily, connotate a negative event. And then the third one is the turning point of a disease where an important change takes place, indicating either recovery or death.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of negative, but hear me out, because you and I have both been through the health crisis, and when you hit the crisis point, it's like either it takes a turn for the worse or it takes a turn and gets better.
Mm-hmm.
So you and I have both experienced a positive crisis,
right?
In that regard. So that being said, when you have a crisis and you're very keenly pointed out inflection point, although I think opportunity is also relevant, although it's not the best definition,
Mm-hmm.
because you have an opportunity to adjust something.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the things that the interesting things about life is that life is kind of like a machine that once it's going, you don't get a whole lot of opportunities to change things without breaking the machine. Right.
Yeah.
So when you're able to change something, it's sort of like changing gears in an automatic transmission car, right? The inflection happens, the change happens. There is a crisis, a decision point. In other words, RPM exceeds the threshold of efficiency, and now you change gears, right? So you have both an inflection point and an opportunity to be seized. So one of the case in points that I want to use for this, and this is probably not a good example, but it's going to work. It's absolutely going to work. I was watching a documentary, and one of the talking heads in the documentary said that recessions are an opportunity for the rich to get richer.
Yeah.
Because when a recession happens, the price of tangible assets goes down.
Yeah.
And so the people that have the most liquid assets, they're able to exploit that crisis and basically exploit the inflection point and say, okay, I'm going to amass more of these assets. Okay. Like I said, not the best example right now, but it works. So the thing that I think about is, okay, how do we, first of all, let's take a look at a crisis from a philosophical standpoint, and I wrote down a couple of things. That one, you have the Stoic perspective and the existential perspective. So Marcus Aurelius, he saw crisis as an opportunity to practice virtue or resilience. And you mentioned resilience, right? How do I maintain or sustain myself during this time of crisis, right? And then from an existential standpoint, like Sartre and Nietzsche, they said that basically crisis is a time of existential choice. And let me say this, I don't necessarily agree with that 100%, because I don't think that every crisis represents something existential. It could be totally intangible. It could be totally unrelated, but it's a choice nonetheless.
Yeah.
So everything is not, and I understand where Nietzsche is. I've studied him very extensively, and for him, everything was existential, right? But that's not the case. So let's talk about those two things. Let's talk about the Stoic perspective, and let's talk about the existential perspective, and let's kind of unpack that a little bit. Let's get into our heads a little bit here.
Yeah.
I don't want to get way above anybody's pay grade or anything like that. But what I do want to do is I want to make sure that we're sharing something that is going to help somebody understand things in a way that they didn't before they got here. So
yeah, I think that as far as like from the existential perspective, and I'm probably using this term a little bit loosely, but that's what I'm talking about. Like it's an opportunity to reinvent yourself. Any crisis is an opportunity to reinvent yourself. And so for people that are going through crisis, whether it's existential in nature or not, one of the ways to be resilient, one of the ways to feel empowered, one of the ways to manage those crises is to realize, okay, I have the opportunity now to, like the serpent, shed my skin, and have some renewal here, have some change, think about life differently. I think all of us, unless we're just really killing it, I think most of us, there is always some level of frustration with life, always some level of frustration with the self. It goes on in the background. Maybe we don't pay attention to it a lot. Maybe we don't notice it a lot because of whatever's going on in our life. But I think all of us, if we're honest, we'd say there are things that I would like to be different about myself, right? So I think a crisis is an opportunity to transform the self in most cases. Doesn't mean it has to go down to the nature of an existential crisis. But let me say this about existential crises. You can go through a crisis of existentialism that has nothing whatsoever to do with anything that has happened to you externally in your life that we would normally call a crisis. For example, when I began to deconstruct, quite literally for me, it was a one-day event. I mean, it was like, I'm going this direction. I'm confident I'm moving in the right direction. It wasn't that I felt bad about things. I did feel disconnected from life. In other words, I felt emotionally disconnected. I felt like I was just kind of going through the motions. And then I have this experience that I've talked about many times. And, you know, I mean, I don't mean to be corny here, but the best example or description I could come up with for the way I felt was like when it said, you know, Saul had his experience of Christ on the road to Damascus and the scales fell from his eyes.
Yeah.
I love that illustration because it's this idea of, oh, I'm seeing what's real now. I'm not looking through the veil anymore. I'm not looking through the scales anymore. I'm seeing truth from a different perspective, different level. So that happened to me, even though there was no disease, nobody left me, nobody died, no financial crisis, just going along one day and then all of a sudden, boom.
Yep.
And I found myself smack dab in the middle of an existential crisis, sort of I just was about to turn 45. So it was like the quintessential midlife crisis.
Well, that's kind of existential.
And I'm looking at some research now. I haven't looked deeply enough into it to feel comfortable speaking about it, but there does seem to be some neurological reasons that people go through these things at the middle of life. Like you're almost hardwired for an awakening in middle age. But that's neither here nor there. I want to research that a little bit more in depth before I go say too much more about that. So that can be an existential crisis, right? It's still a crisis. It's like, I don't know how to, deconstruction is a crisis for most people. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And so it's an opportunity. It can be seen as dangerous. It can be an awakening. Like that day, August 13th, 2016, my alarm went off. I woke up. I saw the world differently. And I could have made the decision to hit the snooze button and say, oh, Aaron, don't be ridiculous. Don't think like that. Think about what this will mean if you embrace this. And gone back to sleep, right?
Yeah.
And then just continued. Life would have continued the way that it was. And this is where it's fascinating to me. And one of the topics I'd love to explore with you in the future is chaos theory and specifically chaos magic, because it's interesting to me how really small things, really subtle things can change our perspective on things or lead us down a different path. It doesn't always have to be earth-shaking crisis. It can be something very small, very subtle, like the flap of a butterfly's wings, right? Yep. But if we hadn't made that inflection point, if we hadn't thought differently, if we hadn't made a minor change in the direction that we were going, our lives would be completely different. So those seemingly little events can lead to a cascading of major events that occur in our lives. So for me, I laid down to, I opened a box. It brought up some trauma, and I laid down to deal with the trauma, and I had a experience in meditation, and I had a decision to make. I can either embrace this experience and explore it and see where it goes, or I can, in my own terms, go back to sleep. And both have very different outcomes.
Yep. Yeah, I was thinking about that. Like I read somewhere that when the astronauts first went to the moon, Apollo 10, not Apollo 11, Apollo 10, that they had to make over 100 course corrections per minute.
Wow.
Because if they were like 1 degree off,
wow,
they'd be lost in space. So you think about these minor course corrections kept them on track to get to the moon and back.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what you're talking about. It's like everything, and that's the other thing too, is that a lot of times when we think of existentialism, we think of sea change, right? We think of something, this is something that really impacts my way of thinking, my way of being, my way of working, right? My way of relating. But it's not. Well, let me put it this way. Even a small change can be existential.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
And a macro change may not be existential. It just may be a big change.
That's so true.
And that's one of the things we have to kind of like decouple events from philosophies, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times we kind of lump things together. But what you were talking about is like small changes. Like for me, in this weight loss journey, it's been a simple change in adjusting what I eat and when. What I eat and when. And those two small things have made all the difference in the world. Because I was telling somebody this story that when I was working out with my buddy Eric Terry, retired Navy SEAL, Eric and I were doing 1,200, 1,300 calorie workouts 6 days a week. Yeah. And if you do those, yeah, you will lose weight. You'll get in shape. But if you don't change how you eat, if you don't change when you eat, what happens is the moment you stop exercising, all the weight comes back. And it comes back with a vengeance. It's like biblical. It's like seven spirits stronger than the first one. They come back and whoop your ass.
Yeah.
And so you don't want that. So what you want to do is you want to make changes that will accommodate changes in your activity. And also you want to change your activity to, impact or influence the things in your diet. So the thing that I tell people is that, okay, walk a little bit. If you can't get up and do, jump rope or do extensive weight training or extensive cardio, just walk. If you walk, you're doing 100% more than someone who's doing nothing.
Right.
What am I getting at? Is that it's not the big changes that yield the big results, and so when we talk about a crisis, okay, so a crisis could be like you and I have experienced a health issue, an inflection point, a pivot in our lives that say, okay, we need to change something, right? And that's a crisis. But it could be that, well, I just want to have more energy so I can go out and play with my kids or my grandkids, right? That's a crisis.
Right.
It's not of the same order of magnitude, or well, let me say this: order of magnitude is relative.
Yeah.
Because what we went through was obviously significant because it was life threatening, but someone who's just looking at a quality of life issue, it could be just the crisis could be just as severe, right? Or you could say, well, I'm doing pretty good in terms of my exercise, but I'm really struggling with trying to keep the weight off. So now that represents a crisis of sorts too, because and let me say this, that when you have plateaus in your life, a plateau is a form of crisis because it's something that you've reached a point where what you're doing is not invoking the change that you want.
Yep.
So now you need to find another pivot. You need to find another inflection point to get you past that particular, location in your life. So I think that kind of covers, like, what we're talking about things from a Stoic standpoint and from a philosophical standpoint. So let's talk about the scientific perspective. And so you have one thing, and I'm going to get these out of order because I got my notes and I know you know the notes, but I'm going to go first with chaos theory, because you were talking about chaos theory, chaos magic, and all of that, and that's an entirely separate subject that we can unpack, right? But in the course of this discussion, it says that in the realm of physics and mathematics, chaos theory suggests that within randomness, there are underlying patterns that can lead to transformation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a crisis then could be this a break in the pattern.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have a pattern, and something happens that alters that pattern. It either causes the pattern to change completely, or the pattern to be significantly altered, and that represents a crisis, right? So then we have to find the inflection point and find out how do we and let me just say this about this, because there are two things that you can do in the face of a crisis, right?
Mm-hmm.
One is that you could succumb to it.
Yeah.
You could just fall out and say, Lord, help me, Jesus.
Yeah.
And just fall out. And that is that. Or you can find out what does it take to make a relevant change. And so I think that, like, when we talk about chaos theory, how do we find order in chaos? And let me get really, really deep for a second, because when we talk about quantum physics, right? Quantum physics holds that the mere fact of observing a quantum phenomenon changes the outcome of it. It changes the location or the velocity of the thing, right? To which, Heisenberg said you can't predict both. You can only predict one, and from that you can infer a probability, right? But the mere fact that we're observing things, we're looking at computer screens right now, and the computer screen is something that we've agreed on, right? So we've talked about this before, how the wave function collapses on what we agree on, but under the hood, you're looking at something and you're influencing or impacting it in a different way than I am, right? So how do we derive order from chaos that happens at a fundamental level? Because quantum physics is as fundamental as things get, right? So how do we exploit that? How do we use the chaos of things and find some order, or find some pattern, or find something that we can work with from that, and then implement that into our lives to make our lives better?
Yeah. I think the issue for me is the underlying patterns in seemingly chaos or seemingly random events, right? That we may not see the underlying pattern that's going on. So relationships is a great example of this. So when we're trained as therapists, and I don't do any kind of relational therapy, I'm just putting that out there out front, but I have had the training. We talk about the family system or the relationship system. Same thing I'm sure you've seen in the corporate world, right? Like, it was real popular a few years ago to say you don't have a people problem, you have a systems problem, right? If you fix the system, and by that they meant the pattern of interactions that we would have with one another, whether it's in an intimate relationship, a family setting, a larger family setting, a corporate setting, whatever. We all have various different ways that we relate that becomes predictable. When I say I know Derek, what I'm actually saying is I know your patterns. I've gotten to observe you well enough that I know what you might do in any given situation because of what I've seen you do over and over and over again, right? So if a person has integrity and their character is attacked, then you could rely on the past pattern of knowing that person wouldn't act that way in that situation because that's not their pattern, right? So the way I would look at this is, from the crisis perspective, is changing patterns. So if you have a baby has a mobile, one of those things hanging over the crib, and it's all sort of interacting. It looks like randomness and chaos, but it's a controlled system. So there's actually a pattern. There's a logical mathematical reason that things are spinning the way that they're spinning, right? So we're talking about these little changes. So if I just take a part of that mobile that's spinning and I spin it in a different direction, everything else in that system has to respond to that. And so it can be, in a sense, thrown into chaos right?
Right.
Until it organizes itself in a different pattern, which is what evolution does, right? Evolution kind of seeks to reduce entropy
Yeah.
by discovering the most efficient ways. I hope I'm not butchering this for
No, it's a great segue too, by the way.
it's reducing entropy by finding better, more organized patterns that are more sustaining over the long run than the previous pattern. And we call that growth, right?
Yeah. So it's like, you know, in the second part of that from the scientific perspective is like a biological standpoint, right? And I like how you segued into the evolution part of it. And, you know, one of the things that what I've learned is that evolution is lazy. You know, evolution looks to find the path of least resistance, the most efficient way of doing something, so that a pattern does not have to be repeated in multiple iterations.
Mm-hmm.
It's trying to find the best iteration that it can find to do this over and over again. And so, contrary to popular belief, people say, "Well, I don't believe in evolution because I don't see it." But you evolve. You
Mm-hmm.
evolve. If you're alive, you evolve. Nobody is totally etched in stone. Nobody is totally galvanized in anything that they do. There's some people that they get entrenched in philosophies, they get entrenched in systems, but at the end of the day, even those systems, if a change is introduced to the system, at that point you have an inflection point. You're either going to go with the change in that system, or you're going to rebel against that change.
Mm-hmm.
And for most people, and this is the evolutionary pattern, is that it's easier just to go along than it is to try to, you know, be quixotic and try to tilt against that windmill, right? So when we talk about from a biological standpoint, yeah, there are things that we get used to. Like I said, you mentioned you know how to interface with Derek because Derek has established certain patterns, and you know that if as long as I don't violate the pattern, you know pretty much okay. But what happens is that so again, using you and I as an example, because we've been friends now for close to 8 years. And over that time, you and I have experienced some significant changes.
Yeah.
Over these years.
Yeah.
And these changes have not impacted our relationship. They've changed how we view the world, and they might change how we interface with each other on a macro level, but they don't change the overarching relationship that we share. And so the thing that what I'm trying to say to everybody is that you will have experiences where the inflection point causes a change. You know, the inflection point will cause a change, and that is not only psychological, it's not only philosophical, but it's also biological. It's kind of wired into your DNA.
Yeah, for sure.
And this causes a change in your evolutionary pattern, which will also change the evolutionary pattern of the people who interface with you. I hope that I said that right.
Yeah, no, I think it makes a lot of sense. The thing I love about it is that the crisis is the driver, right? Like things don't evolve, become more efficient over time if they just keep maintaining the same pattern over and over again. This is one of the things I love, and I know I can bring this up now, and I just crack up because I know people are going to just sit there and shake their head at me. But there's a guy named Michael Aquino who, if you go way back to the late 1980s, Geraldo Rivera was always doing he was kind of the original shock jock, you know what I mean? Yep. And he did there was this whole satanic panic thing that happened in the late 80s, early 90s.
Oh man, how I remember.
And he did an episode on, essentially he didn't call it this, but basically it was on the Satanic Panic.
Yep.
And one of his guest speakers was a man by the name of Michael Aquino. Now, Michael Aquino worked in Army intelligence and specialized in psychological warfare, and he was a colonel, and he worked at the Pentagon. And there was a huge controversy around Michael Aquino because he was openly a worshiper of Satan. He was openly a Satanist.
Yeah.
It's a great interview, especially the way that I think that Michael Aquino handled himself in that interview. But he wrote a book called The Diabolicon. The Diabolicon. It's a short little work. But he talks about the satanic principle. Here's how he talks about the satanic principle. The satanic principle is that which disrupts the order by rebelling or by thinking differently, or by, in other words, you get this picture of there's a certain pattern, and without any disruption in the system, that pattern will just continue on basically for eternity, right? If there's no change to it whatsoever, if our bodies don't experience entropy, don't experience change, we never die, right? We just continue to be youthful.
Yeah.
So he talks about how the satanic principle is essential for growth and progress and transformation. It's kind of the same thing with evolution, right? There has to be that sort of crisis point that's introduced in this case, and in the case of what Michael Aquino was talking about, he was saying this satanic principle of disrupting the order and disrupting the order, and in the sense rebelling against God. God has ordered a certain way for nature to function, and without that Luciferian principle coming in and saying, I ain't going along with that, I'm going a different direction, I'm doing a different thing, then there's no change that's introduced into the system that can promote growth and evolution and higher level functioning.
And let me say this about that, right? Because when you think about what is satanic, right? We're going to get into the religious perspective here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that it said that Satan tempted Eve and said, if you eat this,
right,
you will be like God. You will be like God. And so I'll never forget, and I know you went through this too, because this was a big part of the grace movement, that instead of eating from the tree of life, we eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But I'm here to tell you something. I'm going to say something here that's controversial. I'm going to say something here that's going to shock a lot of people, right? Is that the serpent was not the bad guy in the story.
Correct.
The serpent was trying to impart some knowledge, some wisdom that humans didn't, or let me, they had the capacity for it, but they didn't actually have it. And the serpent revealed it to them. And so whenever people say, oh, well, you know, if we just never ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, okay, in that case, we would have been living in naivety.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we would have had no knowledge of what is good and evil. And in that case, we would be free to do evil under the auspices of ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because I don't know any better, right? Mm-hmm. So when you talk about satanic, and I'm gonna tap into my inner Aaron here, right?
Yeah.
Because one of the things that I want to do is I want to divorce Satan from Lucifer,
mm-hmm.
right? Because that is one of these areas where and if you think about it from the standpoint of chaos, we think of Satan as an agent of chaos. And
Correct.
we because we associate Lucifer with Satan, we think that anything that's Luciferian or Satanist that is therefore chaotic and therefore inducive of crisis.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not the case. That's not the case. Not 100%. Because first of all, Satan comes from the Aramaic Hashatan, which means to judge, right? And it also means to destroy, because that's where the word assassin comes from, also etymologically, right? But Lucifer is the light bearer, the bringer of light. And when you look at the names of Jesus, the bright and morning star.
Yeah.
Y'all listen. No, and don't get mad. I'm just the messenger.
Right.
But Jesus, the person of Jesus identified in Scripture, is Lucifer. It's the same person. And now, why am I going here? Because if you think about this, right, Jesus said that I came not to bring peace but a sword. He said, I've come to do the will of my Father. He said, I and the Father are one. He said all of these controversial things, right? What Jesus was doing was creating a crisis. He was actually promoting chaos. He was giving something that the status quo was not comfortable with, right? And whenever there is crisis, to your point at the very beginning, Aaron, inflection point. Choose ye this day.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the thing. So even when we get into Christianity, when we get it, I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's Christianity, whether it's Buddhism, whether it's Islam, that there are these inflection points. There's a point where I have to turn this way or turn that way. I have to accept this or accept that. I have to reject this or reject that. And you have choices. These inflection points are presented to you. And so the point that I'm getting at is that when we start talking about agents of chaos, right? Immediately, if you mention who is the agent of chaos in the Bible, and everybody will say, well, that's easy. It's Satan, right? But hold on for a second. If Satan is who tempted Eve in the garden, he gave Eve something that she didn't have. And why would a loving God keep the knowledge of good and evil from his children? That doesn't make sense. But if you look at it from the standpoint that okay, Satan came in and threw a spanner in the works, as the English are wont to say, okay, now this makes sense, because something is happening that's causing a crisis that culminates in an inflection point, and a choice has to be made, right? So there are two things that could have happened in the garden. One is that Eve could have said, okay, Satan, you fuck up, leave me alone. I'm minding my own business. I know not to eat from the tree, right? It's one inflection point. Eve passed that one. Then when she gets to Adam and she says, hey, try this. And Adam is like, okay, yeah, this is good. Oh, wait a second. I see things that I didn't see before. So watch this. Chaos or crisis will help you see things that you didn't before. When you're in a crisis, now you see. Let me put it this way. If you're in a linear train of thought, a crisis will remove the blinders and cause you to swivel your head.
Yep.
And see this in a 360-degree perspective. And that is, that's powerful. So here again, so Adam has a choice now. because he's tasted the fruit. His blinders are removed. He's got the 360-degree view. What does he do? Blames the woman. God, it's this woman that you gave me. If you hadn't given me this chick, I'd be okay. So again, it's like you have the inflection point, but you have to you have to have some wisdom. You have to have some framework in which to make the decision, so that you make the right decision and you turn in the right direction.
Yeah, that's good stuff, man. Really, really good. And that's the opportunity part, right? So the dangerous part is my eyes are opened. I can see from a different perspective.
Yep.
There's a danger there that I'm going to miss the opportunity. That totally reframes it. Actually, if you're in a crisis, there's a danger you're going to miss the opportunity that the crisis brings, right? Yeah. And so I'm going to blame the woman, essentially blaming God. It's the woman you gave to be with me that caused me to do this.
God, if you didn't put me in this situation, I'd be okay.
Yeah.
You know, you're blaming God.
Yeah. Whereas all of these things are opportunities for growth. I want to come back just because, you know, I'm thinking I'm growing in real time here. If we look at crisis as, or let me say it this way. If we look at Satan as a principle rather than as a being.
I like it already.
Then the satanic principle is what increases efficiency and growth and evolution and organization.
Let me throw something in here, like Anton LaVey, right? In the Satanic Bible, he said the first commandment is do as thou wilt, right? And people say, oh, well, that's just terrible. That's the Christian perspective. But if you think about it, if we have free will, then do as you will. It is that's an inflection point that guides you in a proper direction, I would think.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, from the perspective of someone that's in a codependent relationship, they are succumbing, they are surrendering their will all the time to the toxic person in their life. The woman that's stuck in an abusive relationship and keeps going back, she's stuck in this pattern. So if we look at this satanic principle as that which disrupts the order for the purpose of transforming it and improving it and making it better, then the prophets, because Satan simply means, like you pointed out, simply means, you know, to judge, to assassinate the enemy. Basically, Satan is whatever is opposing, whatever is the enemy. And so we settle into social paradigms that are unhealthy eventually, right? Maybe they work for a time. So the prophets, when they're challenging whatever the status quo was in Israel in that day, they're operating in a satanic principle. Jesus was operating in a satanic principle. Otherwise, he never would have been crucified.
Yep.
Because he had to be perceived as the enemy. He had to be perceived as a revolutionary or a rebel rouser in order to be crucified to begin with.
Mind blown.
I mean, so let's extrapolate that further. So the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the American Revolution, any revolution is a satanic principle at work. Any sort of civil activism that looks at social justice and says the current system isn't working, and so we're going to come in and flip over the tables. We're going to disrupt it. We're going to, you're always perceived as the enemy when you're really the agent of growth and transformation and change. But because you're so disruptive and because you're bringing forth the crises, you're perceived as dangerous. And so therefore you have to be killed. And we've seen that it play out in the history of our nation, particularly with civil rights, right? And so it's a principle. If we, in other words, if we see it as a principle instead of a person, we can see this as a existential dynamic that we deal with as human beings, or something that's built into the pattern of the universe. Otherwise, evolution never would have even happened. Otherwise, you know, you guys have said that cracks me up, and it's true. It's true. I'm not saying it cracks me up in a bad way at all. the universe is out to destroy you. You know, it's out to kill you. Just ask the astronauts that got stuck in outer space for whatever. But yet life is, and life wouldn't be if it wasn't for this principle that's built into life that says we can't settle at the level that we're at. We need a disruptive agent,
right,
in order to improve things. And that disruptive agent can be seen when it's disrupting. It's seen as the enemy, it's seen as the adversary, but it's the satanic principle that's projecting things towards growth.
Man, that that's powerful. And you brought up something that's near and dear to my heart. Excuse me. So Neil deGrasse Tyson said that he contradicted the religious perspective, saying that God created this planet specifically for life, and he said no, this planet aims to destroy us. It's only through our resilience that we manage to persevere. Right. It's only through. I'm going to say it, and people are going to get mad. It's only through a satanic principle. It's only through a Luciferian principle that you survive. In other words, there has to be some light shown on this, and there has to be some judgment of the situation that brings about the change. And again, when you talk about, like, okay, humans were hunter-gatherers for most of their existence until like about 1,000 years ago, 1,200 years ago, when people started agriculture. And so now we're not hunting and gathering for food. We're doing domestic production.
Correct.
Right. When I can imagine the first farmer, if somebody said, "Oh my God,
exactly,
what are you doing?"
You know that happened.
You
know that happened.
Are you fucking kidding me? We hunt. And he's like, well, no. If I get some deer and I domesticate them and I feed them and I fatten them up, and then I could kill them, and I can feed more people more efficiently than you do hunting and gathering. And someone would say that person was possessed of a devil.
Absolutely.
Or the first group of folks that say, hey, instead of just pitching tents, let's create a township, and let's have rules by which the township operates. And I can imagine that our ancestors are like, oh God, no. We pitch the tent and we travel when the sun is up, and we pitch our tents in the night. We set our campfires. And they're like, no, you don't have to do this. We can actually build structures built of wood and built of stone. And again, this is a crisis, because now people have to decide how they're going to live, right? Am I going to continue hunting and gathering, which I know is going to expend a lot of energy? It's going to take a lot of time. Or do I, take up this lap of luxury living in this township?
I love it. Yeah. So just as we're talking about this, so let me just throw this out at you, right? So I'm gonna approach this with a fresh appreciation of the Jesus story. And here's what I mean. I follow Myth Vision loosely. It gets on my nerves to some degree, but I don't know if it's a podcast out there.
Yep.
And so one of the things they were talking about was that this resurrection trope was common in the Greco-Roman world.
Yeah.
That somebody lived, died. Usually it was Caesar.
Hercules. That's part of that trope.
They were resurrected. They often appeared on Roman roads. So they're able to, look at, here's what they say about various different Caesars. They died, they resurrected. People saw them after they died. The bodies disappeared. People saw them on Romans roads. So, in Mark's gospel, which is the earliest gospel, you have Jesus appearing to these guys on the Roman road, the road to Emmaus, whatever. I think that's in Luke. I'm not sure that's totally in Mark, but the same accounts basically
Yeah.
there. But the interesting thing, whoever crafted the story, right? Whoever came up with this, what's interesting to me was here you have a rebel. You have someone crucified as a criminal. You have somebody coming from an oppressed group of people that were slaves, that were the defeated, they were the conquered, they were the occupied. So in that sense, I don't know the full spectrum of Roman raised people, right? I don't know the full spectrum of the resurrection story, but the ones they cited in the episodes that I've seen, they're usually like a Caesar or a somebody that sustains in other words, the resurrection story is told to sustain the order of the day.
Yeah.
Here you have a story of someone that rises up, right? That rises up from nothing, that rises up from obscurity, who was born in a manger.
Right.
And no, he's God. He resurrected, but was first crucified as an enemy. And so if we just look past all of that and look into the pattern, it's this same pattern of things get introduced into our lives, or things get introduced into the survival of the species. However you want to look at it, this satanic principle that at first looks like the devil. This looks terrible. This looks awful. It's disrupting our way of life. It's disrupting the order of things. It's disrupting the system, but yet built into it is the power to transform the system, to cause it to overthrow what is, so that what will be has a advanced dynamic and pattern. So back to the chaos theory. In other words, this element that comes in and introduces disruption to the pattern within the chaos, so that now the pattern has to completely reorganize itself. And when it reorganizes itself, if it's growing, if it's evolving, it's reorganizing itself into a more efficient way of doing things, which is exactly what you're talking about with the going from hunter-gatherer to agriculture. So it just seems to me to be a principle that's built into the nature of the way things are.
Yep.
That, I don't know, maybe we should honor more than we do.
But watch this. This is how religion flips this around, right? They say God is not the author of confusion.
Yeah, but
Go ahead, man. Go ahead. Go.
But then from that perspective, God is that which is maintaining the status quo. And don't we see that? Don't we see even today in evangelical churches and stuff, like, no, we don't want to be progressive. We don't want to be inclusive of LGBTQ.
Oh, you are in my head right now.
Okay, we want to. Church has to look like this. God has to look like whatever the case may be. So in that sense, then God is that which maintains the lower level of order, and Satan is that which promotes its growth and its evolution and its transformation. No wonder people worship Satan. I hope Tommy's watching. I hope Tommy's watching so he can hear me say that.
Well, Tommy will catch it on replay for sure. But again, you are like right in the space, in my head space right now, because that's the whole thing. Is like when they say God is not the author of confusion, that's not God saying that. Right. That's people.
Right.
People want to, like I said, humanity, biologically, we're lazy. We don't like change. We don't like to do something new. That's not our nature. We like what we like, right?
Oh, that's so true.
When we say God is not the author of confusion, is just simply saying that, okay, my interpretation of God is that God is unchanging. But
yeah.
And I've said this before, that how can you base your life on the writings of pre-first century goat herders? They have no idea. Oh, they don't know what an electron is. They don't know what a radio signal is. They don't know what they don't know what social media is. There are so many additional things that have happened in
Yeah.
humanity
Yeah.
that serve as waypoints, right? So watch this. The concept of milestones, right? Milestones are simply this. When we think about milestones, we think about project management. But a milestone literally is a stone that was placed every mile along a path so that someone would know what the distance was between 2 points. You count the number of stones. And so London is so many stones away from Gatwick, and therefore so many miles. When you have these milestones, this is like a reliable way of navigating. But somebody comes in and says, hey, this is the way to Southampton. And they put a milestone in that represents an inflection point, a change in direction to go to Southampton. So the people who have laid down these milestones between London and Gatwick, they're like, oh, this is blasphemy. It's blasphemy. But what it's doing is it's creating a trade route from London to Southampton that did not exist before. And so when we think about crisis, right, a crisis, to go back to the original premise, right, you said that danger and opportunity, and you said it's not really an opportunity, it's an inflection point. But I think that for the sake of this discussion, we can say there's also opportunity, because the inflection point presents an opportunity. It presents an opportunity to go somewhere off the path that you were on, right?
Yep.
So the thing is that when we start talking about danger, okay, what is danger? Let's talk about what is danger.
Let's do.
Danger is simply something that presents itself. It's something that is unknown that presents itself.
Yeah.
That's all the danger is, right? If someone you're walking down the street and someone just cuts across you. Now you're walking on the sidewalk and this person just walks in front of you. That's danger. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's dangerous, because this person may not have any harm or malice in their intent, but they crossed your path. They broke what was common for you, what you were expecting, and therefore it is now a danger. Mm-hmm. So when a danger shows up, it's simply an unexpected occurrence facing your expected path. So the thing is that let me say this. So I'm going to quote two different people because I talked about Eric Terry earlier, my Navy SEAL buddy who trained me, and I'm also going to talk about my martial arts Sifu, Brad Garrison. And Brad would always say, you have to learn to embrace the danger. Mm-hmm. He would always say, danger is your friend, not your enemy. Mm-hmm. Because what danger does is it causes you to rethink a scenario that you had been accustomed to thinking of one way. Mm-hmm. It forces you to rethink it. So true. And that's the beauty of danger. So like, you have teenage sons, and one is about to start driving, right? So you warn your kids about all the dangers of driving. Now you're not saying, hey, I want you to react to, I want you to have this visceral reaction to everything you see. No, I just want you to be aware that these things happen. And when they do happen, what I want you to do is I want you to observe them. And I want you to take that information in and process it and save it for another day. Because even if this danger did not present a dangerous scenario for you, I want you to remember this so that if it happens again, you'll know how to react. And in that case, you embrace the danger and you make that danger your friend, your ally, instead of your enemy. I'm about to stop preaching now.
Dude, that's so good. That is so good. Um, mm, I'm feasting on that for a minute because instead of responding in this sort of fight or flight response, which is a conditioned response, right? This is
Yeah.
bad. This is evil. This is going to destroy me.
Yeah.
So we try to eliminate it, or we try to eliminate ourselves, one or the other, right? So fight is to eliminate the threat, or flight
Yeah.
is to eliminate myself from the threat. Either
Right.
way, I don't
But,
want this
what's
relation.
the third one? What's the third one, Aaron? Because that's something you
Freeze,
taught me.
freeze,
Freeze or fawn.
yeah, freeze and fawn, yeah. But being able to see it as not your enemy. Like, what would happen if we just shifted our perspective on that thing alone? You know, the person that disagrees with me is not my enemy. The person who lives there, chooses to live their life differently than me, is not my enemy. The person I do not understand is not my enemy. The situation that's coming at me
Mhm.
is not my enemy. It's my opportunity. So even if I don't agree, like even if it's somebody who I think is really wrong.
Trump supporter.
Yeah, I was avoiding that, but I have the opportunity to understand their philosophy, you know, to expand my perspective. And by expanding that perspective, I may even come to the conclusion, yeah, that's definitely something I don't want to embrace.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
But if I'm just eliminating the threat or myself, because I really do believe, I do think, and again, this is getting into another whole esoteric area, but I do think, I am convinced, fully persuaded, that there is something, and there is some science to astrology, to the arrangement of the stars and how it affects our
Absolutely.
consciousness. And so I do think there's something to this transition from the age of Pisces to the
The
age
age
of
of Aquarius.
Aquarius.
Yep.
And so I do believe that there is that next stage of universal evolution that is occurring that requires us to let go of the former pattern, the former way of doing things.
Mm-hmm.
And that everything that's occurring right now, even though it's awful especially for some people right now, it's a necessary step towards shaking up the system in order for the system to be able to reorganize at whatever that higher level is for the next age, the next astrological age that we enter into. So
Yep.
I don't know, maybe I should have brought that up, but
No, and that's fodder for another show also,
sure.
the changing of the age, right? But let me say this, that that when this is something that I've learned, and this was a hard lesson, is that the only thing consistent in life is change.
Yeah.
You can count on change. You can count on change like a clock.
Yeah.
Things will change. And the more that you hold fast to something, the more painful change becomes. So let me just say this. I'm going to speak very personally about my life, because in 1994, my wife at the time died of cancer. Hardest thing I ever had to go through. The hardest thing I ever had to go through. And I really thought that when she died, I'd die, because I didn't see my life beyond life with her.
Right.
But what I learned was that at a certain point prior to her departure, I learned to let go. And I didn't realize that I learned the lesson. But when the transition happened, I was like, okay, this happened and I'm still here. something happened that allowed me to continue on.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I've seen is that when people are going through these kinds of transitions where they lose a loved one, they lose a child, they lose a spouse, that they figure out how to continue on.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's some people that succumb to that, and they'll be like, oh well, my spouse died, I'm going to die, and you see that happen all the time. But when life is really seeking its own water level,
Mm-hmm.
that life will figure out how to make you go on.
Yeah.
And so what you do is you learn how to hold on to things loosely. So
Yeah.
So here's the thing: that when a crisis manifests in your life, you have to understand that, first of all, that the crisis is a passing phenomenon. It's not permanent. And my mom said something
Correct.
to me, as I had an episode back in September, and
Mm-hmm.
and she said, don't let a temporary situation
Mm-hmm.
force you to make a permanent decision.
Right.
So what you do is you have to say, okay, that you have to identify, is this temporary or is this permanent? And y'all hear me. 100% of the time, 100% of the time, the situation is temporary. 100%. That
Yeah.
no matter what it is that you're going through, it may seem daunting, it may seem painful, it may seem dark at that moment, but in the end, it's temporary. It's going to pass.
Mm-hmm.
And so the crisis comes, but then the crisis presents an opportunity, an inflection point, somewhere where and man, listen, if you can learn to embrace the crises and say, okay, what is the lesson that is here to teach me?
Mm-hmm.
Or what is the opportunity that is here to present me? Because I have an inflection point and I have an opportunity to learn, or I have an opportunity to grow.
Mm-hmm.
What am I going to do with this? So in other words, if I could just say this and then I'll drop the mic and I'll close, that when the inflection point happens, figure out how does it help you to become your best authentic self instead of succumbing to it. And if you do that, you'll do okay. And that's it for me, Aaron.
Yeah. Now we're back to stoicism, which we kind of glossed over, but I mean, essentially that's what you're saying. Like,
Yeah.
at least that's what I hear you saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, great mic drop moment. You want to look at some comments or?
Yeah. Let's look at some comments.
I tried looking just a minute ago. For whatever reason, I can't seem to ever see them on Facebook when I'm doing this.
Okay, so let's see. Marianne Jenke, she says, Jesus, chakras open, blaming the outward. They are one and the same, Jesus and Satan. And, I'm going to tell you something. When I saw that, I was really troubled by that.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I was really troubled. But when I got past the crisis and I saw the opportunity and the inflection point, then I was able to pivot and say, okay, this is not as horrible as I was taught that it would be.
Yeah.
Yep. And Shannon Morris says, so then it's a break in the continuing cycle. Yes, absolutely. And Marianne again, she says, fuck church evangelicals. Oh, Tommy, there's Tommy. He says, hail Satan.
I think he's a card-carrying member, but anyway, I don't want to endanger him in case there's another satanic panic.
No, it's like Tommy says, I literally jumped on right before you mentioned me. Speaking of the devil, I guess.
That was clever. That was clever. Speaking
It
of
was
devil,
indeed. Tommy, you get an A+ for that. Matter of fact, send me your address. I'm going to send you a copy of Deconstructing Religion 2 for that one.
That's awesome.
Let's see what else. Marianne was very active. She says, I do not like the dangers we're facing today. Not being MAGA or having brown skin puts us in danger. You know, that's a micro danger, right? I'm not diminishing it. I'm not saying that because as a brown skinned person, I'm not diminishing that at all. But I'm saying it's a micro danger. It's not macro. There are some macro dangers that are bigger than that. And I know some folks may get mad at me for saying that, but I say it and I mean it. And then Marianne says it's important to stay out of duality. Let me say this about that. I don't think the duality is necessarily a bad thing. I think that the duality is like anything else that can be abused. It's not necessarily the enemy, because there are some things that are pretty binary, like don't murder. That's pretty binary. Don't rape. That's pretty binary, right? And I get those things, but you know there are nuances to everything. You know, I'm not gonna get into that, but there are nuances to everything.
Sure.
And I think that's all of the comments.
All right.
That showed up on your page. I don't know what. And then we got some in the comments here. Tommy said, "Yep, got my card. Pretty much just joined to support the political activism. You might call me a cultural Satanist."
Yeah.
Tommy, I love you, man.
Yeah.
Serious. Send me your address. I'm going to send you a book. The Artsy Muse says they are both bringers of light, technically speaking. Yes, we talked about that. Don't make a temporary situation force you to make a permanent decision. That's exactly Tommy. Tommy, God damn it. I love you, man. You said trauma made me who I am. Yes.
He said what? Wait, what?
He said trauma made me who I am.
Oh.
Yes.
To some degree, that's true of all of us.
And then the Artsy Muse, she says chaos is where creativity originates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because otherwise we're just maintaining.
What's that?
Otherwise we're just maintaining. We're maintaining what is. Creation means bringing something into existence that wasn't there before. Bringing
order into what is disorder.
Yeah. Yeah, true.
So, and then Jimmy says, I think you were telling me that story last week about you and Terry doing that crazy workout. Yeah, I was telling Jimmy about that. Let me say this. I owe a debt of gratitude to Eric Terry because, you know, figure the odds of two people that have gone through buds, 2 classes apart, living in the same neighborhood. Let's figure out the odds of that. But then Eric sees me out there jogging every day and he says, hey, you want to get in shape like you were in buds? Because we had talked about, you know, I'm like, hell yeah. So I started working out with him. And so I learned how to really challenge my body. And matter of fact, day before yesterday, oh my God, I had a workout that just, I worked myself out, but I literally fucking killed myself. I was just like, oh my God, I just want to lay down and crawl up in a ball and go, you know, and pass out. And so Eric sends me a message. He says, that means you're doing it right, dude. You know? That's great. So, but here's the thing, like what Eric taught me about exercise, about fitness, because like when we were in buds, we were taught that it shouldn't make a difference in your workout as to whether or not you're actually lifting weights or doing some of the cardio, or whether you're trying to wrestle a bear or run from a tiger. Your body shouldn't know the difference, right? And that was something that Eric reminded me of. And so when I work out, I work out. I mean, I put myself through the paces. I may say, I'm going to do leg day today, and then I'll do arms. Or I'll say, I'm going to do arms today, and I'll do legs. I change it up deliberately so that what I do is not what I'm expecting.
Yeah, it's good.
And so what I do is I introduce chaos into my order so that it pushes my envelope and makes me grow.
And you get hypertrophy.
that part, Aaron, that part.
It's true though. You know, ask any bodybuilder. You can't get hypertrophy if you don't constantly throw the body into chaos.
Yeah.
Like, what the hell? What are we doing now?
And so Flora Samuel, she says, yes, it is. You choose to lean into it. You saw it as an opportunity for change. Crises can be open doors. I think that's a great place to end the show.
I would agree. So how was that Bloody Mary?
This was outstanding.
Excellent.
It was outstanding. So again, if you're into it, 5-pepper Bloody Mary mix, clam juice, you need that, and a little bit of Worcestershire sauce.
Sweet. Clam juice. Sounds so good and so gross at the same time. I don't know if there's ever been anything that did to me so good.
The Bloody Mary is the grossest cocktail of all.
Yeah.
If you think about it. But it's just so fucking excellent.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. All right, everybody. Thank you for coming to our TED Talk. No, seriously, thank you for sharing your time with us. I know Derek and I both greatly appreciate all of you. And thanks for growing with us in real time. I did tonight, man. I mean, you generated some thoughts in me that I was like, dang, I want to grab hold of that. So for that, I thank you, Derek. And
thank you, man, because I'll always grow in real time with you.
Likewise. So with that, peace and hair grease, everybody.